So welcome back, guys. Today we'll be looking at one of. It's not a new video, but I really wanted to check Polymatter's latest series. I guess you could call it the National Insecurity series, or let's just call it the China collapse series. And it's a bunch of videos. Of course, China, which basically fear mongering, like Gordon Chang style. And you can tell, I have a feeling this is because as of late, the number of viewers on his channel has been decreasing. So to keep his views increasing instead of increasing the quality of his videos, he decided to pander to a certain section of the YouTube community. And of course, as expected, he's got a sudden rise in the number of views for these kinds because of these kinds of videos. So basically, this is a response to a blind response. Actually, I watched a little bit of this video, a little bit of in the beginning, but I haven't watched the rest. But we'll be watching the rest here, and I'll be addressing whatever he comes up with in the video. So, national insecurity, China's reckoning. This is part 4. I'm thinking about whether I should do the previous parts, but we'll see. I also won't be stopping it. I won't be pausing it. I'll just address it, whatever it is, in the video itself.
When Beijing won the bid to host the 2008 Summer Olympics, China knew it had been handed a once-in-history opportunity. What would have been a mere sporting event for third place Paris or second place Toronto was more akin to a national graduation ceremony for China.
How?
As 30,000 fireworks exploded on the opening day, as 10,000
And I can
performers
guarantee it most
performed,
definitely
and when the
isn't.
Olympic cauldron was finally lit, China's symbolic tassel was turned, and it ceased being, if only in our minds, just another developing country. China was now a global player. While the Olympics always take on a kind of performative quality, rarely are the stakes so high. After all, a nation only graduates once. In the
Okay.
7 years leading up to the event, Beijing underwent both a physical and cultural transformation. Its airport received a $1 billion upgrade, 3 new subway lines were built, and 23 new roads were laid. Campaigns were launched to fight against spitting, smoking, littering, and cutting in line.
I mean,
Anything that
that's
might give
been there
visitors a negative impression.
before,
In the
way before
words of
this.
then Premier Wen Jiabao, the goal was to depict the country as democratic, open, civilized, friendly, and harmonious. Humorous as this description may sound today, it once
Humorous.
wasn't such a ridiculous idea. Having just joined the World Trade
That's ironic,
Organization, and in the
coming from
context of
an
a
Anglo.
30-year reform era led by Deng Xiaoping, when a
Harmony
smiling
isn't in
Jackie
the
Chan
dictionary.
sang "Beijing welcomes you" in front of the Great Wall, frankly, one was inclined to believe him, however cheesy the music video. China was on its best behavior. A little bit of wishful thinking was warranted. A lot has changed since 2008. Gone are the days of people exchanges, Confucius institutes, and liberalization fantasies. In are crackdowns, crude insults, explicit threats, and war games.
I like how he
Today,
uses
it's
really
awfully
old
hard to
footage
believe that the China
to
who opened
support
its arms
his
to the world,
arguments
who
for
declared the
today.
whole world its friend, is the same country we know now, just 10 short years apart. A decade ago, to observe that China sought soft power would have seemed humorously banal. What nation doesn't? The
I think him and
record-setting $100
Benign.
million plus price tag of the 2008 opening ceremony made very clear exactly how much it cared what you thought of it. 2021 China, on the other hand, is liable to do
I
enough
don't know, man. I
reputational
think it's
damage on
just
any given Tuesday to offset that entire era of reputation building. In an almost too Hollywood ending, the lyricist behind Beijing Welcomes You, a song almost universally loved in China, would eventually be erased from the Chinese
I think it's
internet
just
after
a big
showing support for
celebration,
Hong Kong protesters. What happened to make China aggressively and needlessly burn bridges with the same impressive vigor it once made friends?
What bridges is he referring to?
Sponsored by
The
CuriosityStream
Anglo
and
bridges.
Nebula, where you can watch the bonus
They've
video
been
which
building bridges
accompanies
with the rest of
this
the
one.
world pretty well right
Around
now.
2019, long after every last grandma, Luddite, puppy, and local car dealership finally
Alright.
gave in and created a Twitter account, the company found a surprising new source of user growth: Chinese diplomats. Embassies, consulates, politicians, and ambassadors all suddenly and inexplicably decided to join the site around the same time,
Okay.
naturally raising some eyebrows. After years of largely ignoring American social media, what new 280 character insights did they just have to share with the world?
Well, they need to
Not
address
much, it turns
American
out.
BS.
Follow one of these accounts, and you'd see a continuous stream of Xi Jinping smiling at various objects, among other mundane headlines. Top hashtags used by these accounts included captivating topics like the
I don't
hashtag
think he's checked any of
China-Pakistan
these
Economic
accounts.
Corridor. Once a year, you'd be blessed with a flurry of posts about hashtag two sessions, a reference to the annual plenary sessions of the National People's Congress. Clearly, the Communist Party was still a long way from mastering the art of subtweeting. Interspersed with these glorified press releases,
I don't know
however,
about that. We
was,
got our man
every
Chen
once in a
on the.
while, something very different. The Chinese embassy in Brazil accused its president of having a mental virus. Another diplomat addressed the Prime Minister of Canada as boy and called him a spendthrift. These are two of the more tame examples. Members of the Chinese Foreign Ministry have hurled such bizarre insults as crazed hyena, fatso, and running dog, and at citizens of their host countries,
I'm not
no
sure if
less.
this is true.
They've promoted conspiracy theories, spread offensive images, and mocked India's deadly crisis, all in an official capacity. And in case anyone thought these were just rogue agents, China stamped its official seal of approval on this behavior in March when it held talks with the US in Alaska. There, the most senior Chinese diplomat, who reports directly to Xi Jinping, pulled no punches, saying, quote, "The US is not qualified to speak to China from a position of strength."
That's true
This
though.
style of communication has worked about as well as you'd expect, which is to say, very, very poorly. The share of Americans who view China unfavorably reached the highest level on record 2 years ago, and has only
But
continued
they don't care
rising at the
about
same
American
pace
views.
since. While this trend
The
may
rest of
not
the world loved
surprise
it.
you, take a second to appreciate just how
Someone put America
overwhelming
in
the
its
sentiment
place.
is. For context, the shift in opinion which has taken place in the last 3 years is roughly equivalent to that in the aftermath of the 1989 Tiananmen Square
Maybe you should see
massacre.
Chinese views on
China is now the
America,
country Americans
given
view
America's
most
comments.
negatively, with the
Um,
exception of only Iran and North Korea. That means Americans view it less favorably than Russia, Cuba, Iraq, or Afghanistan. In an unbelievably polarized era, the Communist Party has truly managed to do the incredible: unite Democrats and Republicans.
I don't
China
think it
is
has
one of the
anything to
few
do with the
truly
CPC.
bipartisan issues in America. A majority of both parties, 77% of conservatives,
Yeah, like
54% of
Iraq was a
liberals, and
bipartisan
56% of
issue
moderates,
back then.
see its economic rise as a, quote, critical threat. But don't think this is
It's true.
unique to the
It's a
US.
critical threat to
Unfavorable
the
views of China are
liberal
also at
world
their
order,
all-time high in Australia, the
neoliberal
UK,
economic order.
Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, South Korea, Spain, and Canada. One of the few
Okay.
countries not to experience this trend is Japan. but
surprisingly.
only because it had already maxed out. Now, it would be both unfair and misleading
But
to
Fable
ignore the ways
views
in which the
going down.
US and other countries are also responsible for this shift, in ways both legitimate and not.
I'm glad he
Creating a
acknowledges that
common
at
foreign
least.
enemy and exploiting fears of imagined rivals is, without a doubt, a common political strategy for gaining domestic support. Innocent Chinese and Asian Americans have been caught in the crossfire, used as
Yeah, and
pawns, and
that's
accused only of
exactly
their
what China
race.
was responding to in
But
their
however much
tweets.
foreign politicians may be
Uh,
predisposed to portray China as an enemy, no government has done more to tarnish its reputation than China itself. With
Such
each new
as
crackdown, sanction, or inflammatory remark, China makes it harder and
all of
harder
which
for
are
foreign countries to
responses.
associate with it. Its hostility has brought its Southeast Asian neighbors closer together, made Australia wary of its influence, and single handedly thwarted its investment deal with the European Union. Whenever there remains some room for giving it the benefit of the doubt, China is incredibly quick to eliminate any ambiguity. When Huawei tried to prove its independence from Chinese authorities, for instance, those very authorities were the first to defend the company. And in its ongoing crackdown against Jack Ma,
Because
it's
it's a
made
Chinese
perfectly
company.
clear nobody is above the party. The big
It's clear that
question then
billionaires
is
aren't above the
why?
country.
Why aren't individual diplomats, all the way up to the highest ranks of power, absolutely intent on willfully destroying China's reputation? What does it get out of
Well,
all
amongst the
this?
Anglos, it was
To
already
answer this
destroyed,
question,
so
we
they thought,
necessarily
might
have to
as well go
leave the
in.
realm of raw facts and enter that of speculation. We've seen what
Oh boy, here
is,
we go.
now we try our best to explain it. The most common theory goes something like this. The difference between 2008 and 2018 China is that today it's in a position of strength. China can afford to be confident and
That's not
assertive because
speculation,
A,
that's
it's a
objective
large,
truth.
powerful, and important country, and B, it genuinely believes in the decline of its rival, the United
That's
States.
also an
Its
objective
diplomatic
fact.
approach may be brash, but only because it otherwise wouldn't be taken seriously. By setting the precedent that China will retaliate against even the slightest
It's speaking
perceived
in a
aggression,
language that
smaller,
Anglos will
less powerful
understand.
countries are deterred from acting out.
Not
The
small
problem
countries,
with this line
America
of thinking is that strong,
specifically.
powerful nations generally don't go around needlessly destroying their own reputations. China's method of
America.
asserting itself, calling people thugs and hyenas, is just plain cartoonish. It belongs in Hollywood, and that's no coincidence. The term used to describe this
The
behavior is
irony is
wolf
incredible here,
warrior
no
diplomacy,
doubt.
a reference to a
But
hyper
that's not what I'm
patriotic
addressing.
Rambo style Chinese military film franchise.
We're all very
The
well aware
second
of
theory is that its
American
diplomats
hypocrisy.
are, in essence, acting, though the movie only makes sense in Chinese. People or countries as confident as China are always insecure. Does the kid on the playground who constantly
What?
feels the need to puff up his chest and warn you how tough he is seem confident? Seasoned diplomats, of course, are not 11-year-olds on the playground. They're trained professionals with careers at stake, which suggests their colorful language serves a real purpose. The reason the smallest dog barks the loudest is not just to compensate for its relative size, but also to convince itself. The audience for the PG-13 rated movie Chinese diplomats star in every time they tweet an angry insult is not the world, but rather the Chinese public, who respond to these attacks just as positively as the rest of the world does negatively. In
By
response to
rest of the
China's
world, he
adversarial
means the
tone in the
Anglosphere,
Alaska talks, for
basically.
instance, the
But the
Chinese
actual
internet was
rest of the
flooded with
world
support for the diplomats, who were
really
finally
loves
standing
any
up for the
country
country.
actually putting
It
America in
works.
its place.
The language has become more and more inflammatory because it's expressly designed to create conflict. The more offended the foreign
Conflict
public,
wouldn't
the more
happen if
hatred is
America didn't
hurled back
constantly
at China,
interfere
which
in
in
another
turn puts
country's
the Chinese
internal
public
affairs.
on the defensive. It's a simple trade: lose support abroad in exchange for stoking nationalism and thus support at home. But is it really worth it? You may quite
That
reasonably
thing
wonder.
doesn't even make any
Credibility
sense.
is among the most valuable resources a nation can behold, and rebuilding it takes years, if not decades. By so thoroughly
Oh,
burning
America
every
knows that
last
very well.
bridge, China has implicitly committed to its aggressive tactics for years to come. With the costs this high, the only world in which this trade
He
would be
doesn't specify
worthwhile
what
is
kind
if
of
its leaders were
bridges
that
they
worried about
bridged
the outlook
exactly.
at home. They may have good reason.
Okay, here we go.
First, its population is rapidly aging. The
Alright.
past few decades of widespread improvements to quality of life have coincided with a glut of productive workers, those aged roughly 30 to 64. In the next few
I think
decades, these producers will retire at a staggering rate, and
to
the
address
one
this
child
issue on my
policy will
part
have
would
left too
require
few
another
people to
video because
replace
it's a
them.
really complex issue.
Intense nationalism and the
Uh,
difficulty of learning the Chinese language, among other things, will prevent immigrants from filling in these gaps in any meaningful
but he's
way.
definitely, if he's American,
Second,
he's
so far
definitely
failed to
projecting
transition to consumption
what's
led
happening in
growth.
his own country.
Instead, nearly a third of its economy relies on an unsustainable real estate bubble. The vast majority of new
Wrong.
purchases are of second or even third homes, and prices across the country reflect a highly speculative market. Because local governments rely on land sales for their survival, they have no choice but to encourage wasteful spending merely to balance the budget. Third,
Oh
a
my god.
combination of mismanagement, climate change, and geographic luck have left China with a
What
severe
kind of
water shortage.
mismanagement? What are
In the
you
past
referring
two
to?
decades, 28,000 of its rivers have dried up, the majority of the rest are severely polluted, and what remains is only a drop in the bucket. The North China Plain, one of the country's most populous
Okay, but
regions,
these
faces a
issues
Saudi
are.
Arabia level crisis, minus the oil riches which enable desalination. What sets these challenges apart is not their
He
severity or
doesn't need
even
oil
scale.
riches.
Every country faces obstacles to its development, and more than three videos could be devoted to
When it
many of
comes
them.
to China, there's
Neither
no
demographics, housing,
limit to
nor water
funding.
problems are unique to
Of
China.
course, this guy doesn't
In
know that.
fact, in each case, there exists, if not a solution, at least a way to mitigate the effects. China could have ended the one child policy decades earlier. It could accept
That's
the
a
short
valid.
term losses necessary to shift its
If they
dependence from
if
real
they did
estate,
it decades
and
earlier,
market
though,
based pricing reform would
there was a
reduce its wasteful
report
use of water.
that if it the
No, what
population would
makes
now be
China
2 billion,
unique is that it
which should
doesn't believe
be
it can admit the extent
uh,
of these problems, and therefore can't adequately address them. In the eyes of the Chinese government,
just
a
because he can't read
$100
Chinese
billion
doesn't mean they don't
engineering project to physically
admit
move
to these
water
issues or
halfway
address
across
these
the
issues.
country is easy, while simply raising water prices is unthinkable. The Communist Party has now held power for as long as the Soviet Union existed, and it's
Okay,
acutely aware of how environmental protests contributed to the downfall of its counterpart. Raising the price of water even slightly would cause a
that's
material
not what
change in
led.
quality of life for
That's
millions
not
of
what led
poor
to the fall of the
Chinese, not to
USSR.
mention the effect it would have on economic growth. Ecological or pricing concerns may not intuitively rise to the level of national security, but in the words of one Canadian researcher, they do, quote, present a unifying focal point for dissent that crosses geographic, cultural, socioeconomic, and political lines. While China may project confidence in press conferences, its actions tell a very different story. Its military budget receives considerable attention, but you might be surprised to hear it actually spends more on domestic security. Provoking nationalism
I
is
like
like
how the
training
graph
an
stops
attack
at
dog.
2017,
Sure, you gain a powerful
but
weapon
it
to
doesn't
use against
address
your real or perceived enemies, but it's a rather blunt
like
weapon.
it doesn't
The more a
address
dog is wound
how
up,
that
the
spending has
stronger its
decreased
bite will be
internal
when the time
spending
comes
on
to fend off
security.
an attacker. But also, the more unstable it becomes, and the more the owner should be worried about losing
4 years.
control. Nationalism creates immense pressure for the government to act tough, increasing the cost of restraint. The one thing it cannot
So
afford to
once
do
again,
is be
if he's
perceived as
American,
weak or
he's basically
indecisive,
projecting
because if it
what is
does, it
happening
risks
within his own
becoming the
country
dog, or
onto
rather wolf's, next
China in this
victim.
case.
Next year, Beijing will once again host the Olympics, but this time it won't be so welcoming. If
Okay,
2008 was the culmination of
maybe
three
not in the
decades
Anglo
of
countries.
reform and
I don't know.
optimism, 2022 is shaping up to be just as
Well, that's
consequential.
just false. There
What
was
are
a
the
lot
odds
of
of a boycott, and what will
yeah,
the
there was a lot
gains
of that back
signify
then as
this
well.
time? Watch the
There's
bonus
a lot of
video which
negative
accompanies
sentiment
this
back then
one
as
on
well, but it
Nebula,
still
the
happened.
streaming site I helped create along with your
No
other favorite
boycott,
educational
nothing
YouTube
happened.
channels. Roughly every other Polymatter video has bonus or extended content available on Nebula. The first part of this series, for example, has a section on why the US doesn't have the same demographic challenges as China. There's one about how Singapore convinced its population to drink pee, one on the future of food, and much more. Nebula also has entirely exclusive originals, like Wendover Productions' documentary about Alaska, Low Spec Gamers podcast.
Right. Okay. So this basically the so-called issues he was talking about in this video. He doesn't actually, especially like the banning the bridges part. He just says the whole world, but he doesn't go like into specifics, like who exactly. He was very vague with like the water issues and like how they would like environmental, how that would lead to so-called insecurity reckoning or whatever. He didn't include a passage, but like that's that's like a worst case, like extreme scenario. For example, like that'll be like if it was like India where water shortage is a prime issue now, but that's not the case in China. And also, let me go back to the thing. Where was it? The graph it showed. Oh yeah, this thing. The wolf warrior hate cycle. So presumably, I think right. So I think it starts at hatred directed at the world first, and then it goes down to hatred directed at China, intense nationalism in China, and then the cycle continues like that. First of all, us this kind of thing like the cycle, this kind of thing, it just doesn't work in that context at all. Second, because it's much more complex. There's a lot of factors. It's nowhere near as simplistic as this guy makes it out to be. Second of all, he doesn't give any examples of hatred. Hatred's a pretty strong word, like hatred directed at the world. No specific examples. At most, I can name some strong responses to U.S. acquisitions and other Anglo hearsay at most. But those are just responses. So really, it starts at if we assume it's as simplistic as a freaking cycle, it'd be at hatred directed at China first from Anglo countries, then hatred directed not at the world but at the Anglos. Intense nationalism in China. I feel like nationalism is a double-edged sword. I don't agree with it, but it's more like a. It's not a cause. It's like a symptom of a larger issue at hand, which is these directed attacks at China from these Anglos specifically, and obviously a lot of folks in like Chinese folks going into Western social media, places like YouTube and all that, and especially places like Reddit, and boy oh boy, it's all just a response to the kind of shit they see on these websites. So it's way more complex than this. Hatred directed at the world. No, it's just if we're gonna assume harsh responses, if you want to go that far, to hearsay is friggin' hatred, then let's assume that. But it's definitely not at the world. It's at Anglo countries and those countries who are not really independent. So I'm looking at in Asia. I'm looking at Japan, South Korea, India, countries that are really submissive to American interests. So Chinese people see that, and he describes this as nationalism, but it's much more complex than that. And the other one, demographics. I think
Few decades of widespread improvements to quality of life have coincided with a glut of productive workers, those aged roughly 30 to 64. In the next few decades, these producers will retire at a staggering rate, and the one child policy will have left too few people to replace them. Intense nationalism and the difficulty of learning the Chinese language, among other things, will prevent immigrants from filling in these gaps in any.
um, yeah, no, immigrants. He's looking at this once again. Let's assume this guy is an American. He's looking at this from a really American centric viewpoint. Immigrants are not the only way to solve this issue. So you have automation, which is happening rapidly in China, and that's their response to this demographic crisis, if you want to call it that. I personally don't see it as a crisis. It's happened to pretty much every advanced economy at this point. Once they reach a certain level of development, their population, it becomes too expensive to want more kids, to afford more kids, I should say. And people, just as they get more educated, firstly because they get more educated, they see that they can they have more foresight. They can think more in the long term, and they see that it's too expensive to afford to take care of kids. But it's not like people don't want kids. They're to my surprise, like I personally don't want kids, but that's just my personal thing. But there's a lot of people who do want to have their own kids and take care of them and stuff, but they just simply cannot afford that. Also, it's a really complex issue. It's not just as simplistic as that. There's also people like me who just don't want kids, as well as, and I guess like there's also, of course, a one-child policy, stuff like that. So it's a really complex issue. But is it a crisis? I don't really call it a crisis because China is at this point one of the most automated countries in the world. So it's not really a reckoning. And another thing,
Relies on an
real
unsustainable
estate.
real estate bubble. The vast majority of new purchases are of second or even third homes, and prices across the country reflect a highly speculative market. Because local governments rely on land sales for
Yeah,
their
but
survival, they have no choice but to encourage wasteful spending merely to balance the budget. Third, a combination of
speculators aren't
mismanagement,
in
climate
control of the
change, and
economy
geographic
there.
luck have left China with a severe water shortage.
So this is what I wanted to address. There's about like 600 cities in China, but this is looking at provinces. So Beijing, Shanghai, they got more than 20 million people. This was in 2016. I don't know about you, but a lot has changed from then. But we'll address this other
In the
comment
past 2 decades,
on this.
28,000 of its rivers have dried up, the majority of the rest are severely polluted,
Again,
and
they've
what
addressed this
remains is
issue.
only a drop in the bucket. The North China Plain, one of the country's most populous regions, faces a Saudi Arabia level crisis, minus the oil riches which enable
Yeah, and how many
desalination.
people live there?
What sets these challenges apart is not their severity or even scale. Every country faces obstacles to its development, and more than 3 videos could be devoted to many of them. Neither demographics, housing, nor water problems are unique to China. In fact, in each case, there exists, if not a solution, at least a way to mitigate the effects. China could have ended the one-child policy decades earlier. It could accept the short-term losses necessary to shift its dependence from real estate, and
They already
market-based
did.
pricing reform would reduce its wasteful use of water. No, what makes
Market
China
based.
unique is that it doesn't believe it can admit the extent of these problems, and therefore can't adequately address them.
Okay, so we'll.
Extent of these problems. No, what makes China unique is that it doesn't believe it can admit the extent of these
He doesn't believe
problems,
he can
and
admit
therefore
to the.
can't doesn't believe it can admit the extent of these
So he doesn't admit it can extend. It can admit.
problems. And
Wait.
China unique is that it doesn't believe it can admit the extent of these
So he apparently doesn't believe he can admit the extent of these problems, even though we have literal 5-year plans addressing this and many other such issues, which presumably he hasn't gone into.
problems, and therefore can't adequately address them.
So his
In the eyes
narrative
of the
is
Chinese
already
government, a $100
contradicted
billion
by
engineering project to
reality.
physically move water halfway across the country is easy, while simply raising water prices is unthinkable. The Communist
Uh,
Party has now held power for as long
Probably
as the
because
Soviet
they are
Union.
a people centric government, so raising water prices would be a bit of a problem. An easier solution would be for a country without funding limitations and with the political will to get it through would be to do this kind of project. So given Polymatter's presumably American, he is American centric viewpoint, that's pretty much impossible because everything's got to be market based, it's got to be profit based, uh, government people centric policies. Hell no.
Thinkable. The Communist Party has now held power for as long as the Soviet Union existed, and it's acutely aware of how environmental protests contributed to the downfall of its counterpart. Raising the price of water
So
even
he's wrong on
slightly would
that
cause a material
immediately.
change in quality of life for millions of poor Chinese, not to mention the effect it would have on economic growth. Ecological or pricing concerns may not intuitively rise to the level of national security, but in the words of one Canadian researcher, they do, quote, present a unifying and political. Its actions tell a very different story. Its actually is like training an attack dog. Sure, you gain a powerful weapon to use against your real or perceived enemies, but it's a rather blunt weapon. The more a dog is wound up, the stronger its bite will be when the time comes to fend off an attacker,
Again, a
but
very
also the more unstable it becomes.
very American centric view of things. He's also projecting exactly what is happening in America right now onto China using data points from 2017. We're in 2021. So apparently Polymatter doesn't know about that. So if you're gonna make a video like this, you gotta have up-to-date statistics and at the very least, obviously, given his bias, and he has to cater to those kinds of viewers, that won't happen. But if you're gonna if you actually want to make an objective report on something, and you want to make your own conclusions, you got to at least have statistics that at least from last year up to last year at the very least. I think the latest data we have is up to 2019, but I'm not exactly sure for these kinds of things he's addressing. But since 2017, a lot has changed. So what I think about this video is it's very simplistic. Doesn't have nuance, no context at all. Basically, fear mongering, as you can tell from the title, if you couldn't already. And yeah, it's obviously to cater to. He wants that bling, you know, so he's got to cater to that audience. He's gonna get more views. I guess he's gonna trend upwards in viewers as his channel, and as his channel caters to those kinds of viewers, it'll become an echo chamber of hate and whatever you want to call it, you know, just false, either misinterpretation of data or just downright speculation, as he basically, I think it was from here onwards or something. Yeah, like as he admitted to himself, it's pretty much all speculative. So yeah, don't take these videos seriously. You know, it's all for monetary reasons that they're acting like this. You got to think of it from a financial standpoint. What makes these people the most money? It's this kind of stuff. So yeah, that's all for this video. The next video that I want to cover that could be like this one is from Economics Explained. Maybe, I'm not sure, but I think he had a China video, which I feel like covering, but I'm not sure. We'll see. So I'll see you guys next time.